Chapter 49. Council of War. In many ways, the Council of War seemed more like a party than it did a meeting of officers. Those who had already arrived seemed to be mingling among themselves and drinking wine from fine crystal glasses. There was even an elf standing at the door with orders to announce every newcomer. This elf wore the same bright blue uniform as any other member of the Elven regular army, but he also wore a white coat over the top of his tunic, indicating that he was here in an official capacity. His insignia declared that he held the rank of chargeman. The white-coated elf stopped Dragonman Fenert, and by association, both Reyes and Wormman. "Can I have your names, please?" "I am Dragonman Fenert, and this is Wormman." Then a look of disgust came over Dragonman Fenert's face as he admitted, "We are of the 421st Hope." The Dragonman didn't bother to introduce Reyes. The white-coated elf took a step forward and coughed loudly. Then he announced, "Dragonman Fenert, Wormman, and a harpy from the 421st Hope." There were a large number of people already there at the council, and they went silent for a moment as the announcement was made. Then they began to talk among themselves again. One voice in particular could be heard above all the others. "Do it properly." The elf in the white coat shrugged his shoulders and turned his attention fully to Reyes, asking, "What is your name?" "Call me Tanrag," Reyes told him. "Fine," the elf said. He then turned back to the massed crowd and gave the announcement again. "Dragonman Fenert, Wormman, and Tanrag the Harpy of the 421st Hope." Now that they had finally been announced, the two officers and Reyes stepped past the official and into the council proper. Here, Fenert and Frayne began to head into the crowd, greeting old friends that by the look of it they hadn't seen for ages. This left Reyes alone. Reyes had no wish to feel like a fifth wheel, standing like a lemon, while Dragonman Fenert and his friends reminisced about old times. Instead, he decided to stay where he was and just look things over. Already, he was beginning to hate this place. There were a lot of people here, although the building could hardly be described as full. Virtually everyone else seemed to hold the rank of at least Wormman. Many were of a higher rank even than that. There were 3 in the room that by the look of it bore no rank at all. In all 3 cases, the creature in question was not of Elven extraction. 2 of them were goblins. They wore facial tattoos that indicated they were both members of the ruling Yagnot tribe. They carried no weapons of any kind, but were both wearing thick fur armour. Reyes had been in Goldspawn long enough to realise that they must have gotten that armour in the land of the 1,000 tribes. Therefore, the 2 goblins had to be here in a diplomatic capacity. The other one in the room that had no discernible rank was a harpy. Like Reyes, she seemed to be keeping pretty much to herself. She did look in his direction once or twice, and each time she would scowl and look away again. Reyes couldn't help but notice that she also unsheathed her claws when she first looked at him. If anything, she made him a little bit nervous. The other harpy also wore a belt that was very similar in design to the one Reyes had, though perhaps the belt itself was slightly wider. She also wore a necklace of beautiful and quite valuable looking gemstones around her neck. Otherwise, she had no regiment insignia of any kind, and no clothing of any description. Of all the others in the room, only one other was also not of Elven birth. He was a Minotaur. This Minotaur wore the rank of a Dragonman proudly on his shoulders. He wore the stark black uniform of Raves Raiders, and was standing next to an elf Wormman of the same regiment. He seemed to have no trouble mingling with the elves at the meeting, nor did he seem to be worried in the slightest about the refreshments that had been provided. Everyone else there was an elf. Most of these elves wore the bright blue uniform of the regular army, and they always seemed to be in pairs, a Dragonman and a Wormman to each pair. Blue wasn't the only colour of uniform at the War Council though. There were many others, but there tended to only be 1 or 2 representatives in each of the other colours. The 2 soldiers in the thick red robes, for example, Reyes knew to be mages from one of the regiments of Inquisitors. Today, their usually present bodyguards were missing. The room itself was relatively dull. There were no side rooms of any description, not even a small alcove that someone could retreat into should they desire a few moments' peace. It also had very little in the way of furniture. There was a large cupboard consisting only of long, shallow drawers of the sort that are ideal for the storage of maps. It sat against the wall to the left of the entrance to the room. On the other side of the room stood a folding table on which was placed an impressive selection of small nibbles and carafes of wine, surrounded by beautiful elven crystal glasses of the same type as many of the guests were already drinking from. Finally, the centre point of the room around which all the guests were gathered stood a large table, on which sat a map that all but totally covered it. The map went into great detail about many of the settlements that occupied the northern lands of the Dukedom of Damothe. The map described many things, such as the size of the farms, including the number of cows, pigs, horses, goats, and even ducks. It gave account of how many peasants could be found in each settlement and what their main trades were, especially if they were smiths of some description. Most worrying to Reyes, it also listed the number of soldiers that had been posted to each village, soldiers who had been sent from the castle and had thus greatly weakened the defensive capabilities of that castle. The central feature of the map, though, was Castle Damothe itself. Whereas the elven spies had evidently gone into great detail as to what they might be expected to run up against in the many villages, the castle itself was little more than a rough outline. Its location was very accurate, and the depiction of the outer walls looked as if they'd been carefully measured and translated to paper. But that was it. The detail as to the layout of much of what was inside those walls was missing. The map of the castle and its surrounding villages bothered Reyes more than little. It wasn't that the place was going to be attacked during the invasion. That was pretty much a given. It was the fact that he was here at a war council where the focused target of the meeting seemed to be his home castle. Of all the regiments of the Hope in the city, why did it have to be his regiment that was given the task of attacking the castle? Reyes was still cursing his apparent bad luck when someone approached him from behind. "It's impressive, isn't it?" Reyes turned his head, wondering who among the soldiers gathered there would be willing to take the time to talk to him. He half expected it to be the other harpy at the meeting, but instead it was an elf. Not just any elf, this one wore the insignia of what Reyes had come to think of as the Dragon Man's superior. Upon recognising the insignia, Reyes quickly brought himself to attention and saluted the officer. "Yes, sir. Sorry, sir. Didn't see you there, sir." "Calm down," the elf said. "We're all friends here." The officer offered Reyes his hand. "I am Alderman Bartinet. I believe you must be Chargeman Chanrag. Is that right?" Reyes willingly took the offered hand. "Alderman. So, finally he knew the official name for that rank." Yes, sir," Reyes stuttered a little. Drakeman." "Seriously, calm down," the alderman said. "I'm not here to stand on ceremony. We're all friends here. We're all aiming towards the same goal of total subjugation of the human race." "Yes, sir," Reyes readily agreed, not daring to do otherwise. "When I look up at the stars, Tanrag, do you know what I see?" the alderman asked. I don't know, sir," Reyes commented. "I'll tell you what I don't see. I don't see our fate. I don't see our victory. Our victory is not in the stars, Tanrag. It is in our own hands. The hands of people like Worman Chlorism of the Children's Brigade." The alderman pointed to a lone individual wearing a sandy yellow uniform. "The hands of people like your own commander, Dragoman Finert, sir," Reyes declared. "Yes, him. Victory is even in your hands, Tanrag. Especially in your hands. For without people like you, there would be no army. And with no army, there would be no invasion." "I think I see, sir," Reyes said. "We will begin the meeting shortly. Although I will be officiating at this meeting, the Emperor's man himself has promised to make an appearance, and it might be nice to let him arrive before we get started. Prepare yourself, Tanrag. I understand that the knowledge you hold of this castle is going to be fundamental to the speed at which we can take the castle." "Me, sir?" Reyes commented doubtfully. "Yes, you. I understand that at one time you were a prisoner of Duke Damothe and were placed under sentence of death by him. I have been told that you are quite intimate with the layout of the castle, the disposition of the soldiers, the numbers and types of siege weapons they have, and so on. You are the whole reason that your regiment has been given the honour of striking one of the first blows of the war," the alderman explained. Reyes felt stunned for a moment. "Are you all right, Tanrag?" The alderman waved a hand in front of Reyes' eyes. Reyes focused on the alderman standing before him. "Sorry, sir. I was just thinking." "Well," the alderman commented, "I must go and mingle. We're still waiting for the last few officers to arrive, and I expect the Emperor's man will be here at any moment. We can start then." "Yes, sir," Reyes commented. "Thank you for stopping to talk to me, sir. I'm not sure a lot of elves would have thought it worth their time." "Oh, seriously, it was a pleasure," the alderman declared. I have fought beside harpies before in many battles, and have often found them to be the key to victory. I prefer to stay on good terms with all my... I'm glad to hear it, sir, Reyes replied. The Elderman grinned. We will talk later. Once the Elderman had moved on, talking to and shaking the hand of a pair of elves to the right of him, Reyes began to think about his future. Part of him wanted to leave the compound again tonight, fly back to the castle, and help prepare the castle's defences. He already knew he couldn't. As his brother had warned, the king had left 2 knights to cut him down if he so much as dared show his face at the castle. There were other advantages to flying back though, or at least to leaving the city. For one thing, he wouldn't have to deal with Pithlene. Reyes really didn't want to meet Pithlene. She was bound to demand too much, and Reyes would be stuck with either doing as she asked or calling her bluff. Somehow he wasn't all that sure that she was bluffing. Then there was Gaggara. How would she react if Reyes made Pithlene his first, as Pithlene said she required? If Pithlene could blackmail him so easily, might not Gaggara have even more dirt on him? Reyes sighed. He looked again at the others present at the war council. The harpy in particular seemed to be ignoring him as best she could. Every time her eyes began to drift in his direction and then suddenly catch sight of him, she would jerk her head away and find something of interest in the opposite corner to look at. Then there was yet another announcement at the door. Empressman Lesatine and his 2 bodyguards, Nibbler and Lushne. The entire room suddenly fell silent. Reyes, and just about everyone else in the room, turned their attention fully to the 3 figures by the doorway. Empressman Lesatine was young, as elves go, especially for his rank. He wore a blue uniform tunic over what appeared to be everyday street clothes, of the type that might have been worn by any elven peasant, although it would have been a well-fed peasant. His tunic was covered in small decorations of various colours, each representing a different battle honour of some description. Standing just behind the Emperor's men were a pair of harpies. Both of the harpies wore knee-length leather skirts, but these skirts bore no distinguishing features, nothing to suggest that either carried any sort of rank. Okay, the Emperor's man announced from the doorway. I have 3 more meetings of this sort to get through today, so let's get started. He circled the table slowly in a clockwise direction, the 2 harpies following him at a reasonable distance. The officers in the room stayed pretty quiet, but there were a few murmurs. One comment that Reyes happened to overhear went, I've heard those 2 creatures aren't just his bodyguards, but they also double as his concubines. Disgusting, came the reply. Reyes wouldn't blame anyone for having harpies as bodyguards. After all, they were very strong, usually quite fast and agile, and their ability to fly could be quite a boon when trying to protect someone. Reyes clearly wasn't the only one to hear the remark. One of the harpy bodyguards had a disapproving scowl on her face that she hadn't had a few seconds earlier. The Emperor's man, on the other hand, didn't seem to notice or care. He stood by the table holding the map and waved his arms to silence everyone else in the room and to indicate that he was ready to speak. The required silence came almost immediately. All eyes were on the Emperor's man, watching every move he made and anticipating the words he was about to speak. In the entire empire, only one elf at a time ever held the highly coveted rank of Emperor's man. It was a rank second only to the Emperor and his mage advisor. The Emperor's man was in charge of the entire army. He was effectively a surrogate for the Emperor himself, and would often be treated as such by the soldiers under his command. It was also a very dangerous rank to hold. Emperorman Lesatine was the 3rd elf to have been made Emperor's man in the last year, the previous 2 having been executed by the Emperor for treason. Emperor's man Lesatine clasped his hands together. Thank you all for your kind welcome. Thank you. He turned his attention to Elderman Bartinet and asked, I don't have that long. Is everyone here? I think so, my lord, the Elderman replied. Good, the Emperor's man commented. He unclasped his hand and let them rest gently on the edge of the table. The assault on Castle Damothe is going to be a joint venture. Every regiment that has a representative here will be involved in the attack in one way or another, even if they are present in little more than a support role. I also see we have a couple of observers here from the land of the 1,000 tribes. I welcome them to this meeting, and hope they will learn how elves wage war. The 2 goblins in fur armour took a step forward and indicated that they appreciated the Emperor's man's words of welcome. Our peoples have a history of warfare in the past. Rarely has a decade gone by without one of us declaring war on the other. Sometimes these wars are fought as a deliberate way to gain land from the other, but sometimes they are started through an accident, such as a patrol crossing the border when it shouldn't. Today we are friends. We are in this war against the humans together. While the Elven Empire is attacking the eastern half of Floreth, the western half will also be under attack by our allies in the Thousand Tribes. The capital city of First Town is in our half of the country and will be taken by our forces. But such is the spirit of cooperation between our two peoples that elf and goblin alike will be allowed to come and go in that city as if we both own it equally. Also, I have word from the Dragon Emperor himself that once the war is over, all goblin slaves will be released to return to their families. The two goblins acknowledged the resulting applause. Then one of them stepped forward and in almost perfect Elistran said, "I thank you, Emperor's man Lessertine, on behalf of my chief and the people of my tribe. We too acknowledge our alliance with the Elven people and assure you that we will match you gesture for gesture. Once this war is won, all Elven slaves held by the Thousand Tribes will be freed, and they too will be allowed to return to their families." Reyes shivered at the thought of the elves and goblins working together, the two powers that always balanced each other in the past. It was part of what had made the human kingdom so stable and so able to defend itself against such a small standing army. If the elves and goblins were going to work together to bring Floreth down, then he doubted that even all the dukes getting together to meet the invading army would be enough to prevent it. The Emperor's man continued, "I also see that we have a pair of representatives from Rave's Raiders. Now, they too will be there purely in an observatory capacity. Their regiment was hit hard when at the Emperor's bequest every human in the city, be they slave or soldier, had to be destroyed. The regiment is currently well below strength, so they will be looking for anyone performing acts of extreme bravery and intelligence in the upcoming battle. Make sure your men are aware of the prestige that is available to both them and you, for there is great kudos in being in a regiment that has a soldier selected to join Rave's Raiders." The two soldiers in the black uniforms didn't seem all that happy at the attention they had suddenly garnered. They smiled and waved, but seemed to be doing so only to be polite. "I'm also glad to see a member of the Children's Brigade with us here today. As many of you may know, I too once fought as a member of the Children's Brigade," the Emperor's man commented. The young man in the sandy yellow coat raised his glass of wine in salute to the Emperor's man. "I'm now going to hand you over to Alderman Bartinet. This is his assault, and he will be going into detail as to how this battle is to be fought. I shall take a step back now, and will leave it in his capable hands." Alderman Bartinet stepped up to the map and said, "Thank you for your kind words, Emperor's man Lessertine." He then faced front and said, "This battle needs to be fought quickly. I want us to be in full possession of the castle no later than lights out that same evening. There will be no time for prolonged sieges. The power of our invasion is in how quickly we can move. If the humans have time to establish a defensive line, then everything could be lost." The Elderman paused for effect. "Fortunately, we have a trump card." He pointed at Reyes. "This harpy was held prisoner at the castle for a number of years, and can tell us a lot about what we may expect to encounter. Judgment Tanrag, would you tell us whatever you can about the castle?" Reyes looked up at the Elderman doubtfully. He then looked at the map laid out before him. Slowly, Reyes pushed his way past the gathered officers, making his way to about the midpoint of the table on the far side from where the Alderman was standing. Here, he was about level with the drawn outline of the castle. He looked at the map, wondering how he might possibly talk about the castle without actually giving anything important away. First, he decided to try and play for time. Is there a quill I can use, sir?" "A quill," the Alderman announced. "Tanrag needs a quill. Can anyone assist him?" There were some murmurs among the covered officers. Some of them evidently had quills or other writing implements upon their person, but they were not willing to lend such items to a harpy. Reyes had expected nothing less of a reaction, and the hesitation in the crowd had bought him a few vital seconds of thinking time. Alderman Bartinet waited patiently for the murmuring to die down. Then he began to wave his hands in an attempt to silence the room properly. "No one?" he asked. He rounded on the elves gathered about the room as if settling things in his own mind. Then, looking straight across the table, he said to Reyes, "I'm sorry, you'll have to manage without." Reyes nodded his head slowly. "Very well, sir, I shall do my best." Then, looking across the table, he added, "But it won't be easy." Reyes looked back at the outline of the castle, wondering what he should say. If he said too much, he might accidentally give away some detail that might endanger the defenders. He began to think that he'd be better if he stuck to things the elves should already know, and exaggerate any other detail in the hope that the elves might be put off the idea of attacking the castle in the first place. Reyes pointed at the outline of the castle. The towers would be a good place to start. They were already very well marked on the map. The elves knew their location, and they very likely knew what sort of defences each tower had. As you can see, the castle has 14 towers, not counting the 2 that sit on either side of the front gate. These are defensive strong points, designed to be plush with the outer walls in order to make them harder to target. Each of them is permanently guarded by just one man. At the first sign of trouble, though, archers will run up the steps to the battlements at the top. There is room on the top for over 20 such archers. Also, at the top of each of these towers is a small catapult-like weapon. The catapult is used to fire large bags of small hard stones. The bags fracture upon being fired, causing the contents to be scattered amongst the enemy troops. Each little stone is quite capable of killing or crippling. Each tower is also ringed with small murder holes, all the way down from the top of the tower to the ground. I'm sure I don't need to tell you what they are used for. The elder man nodded. We know most of this, though I wasn't sure about what sort of siege weapons they had. What about their ballistae? Do they have wall-mounted ballistae? They do, sir, Reyes replied, each slightly lifted at the back in order for the weapons to be able to target downwards, towards a besieging army. Before he could stop himself, Reyes added, the range of these weapons is actually quite limited. How many such weapons do they have, and are they fixed point, or can they be moved around? The elder man asked. I'm sorry, Reyes said, feeling he had already said too much about the ballistae. I must remind you that I was there as a prisoner. He hoped the Inquisitors didn't have a detect life spell on him. They weren't in the habit of telling me about their defences. What I do know is merely what I observed. I was there over a year ago, so anything I do tell you could well be out of date by now. The Elderman seemed to accept this. Very well. What about defenders? What sort of resistance can we expect to meet? I'm not too sure, Reyes said. He hoped he wasn't going too far. Then again, he would rather die than tell the elves that sort of information. As I said, I was a prisoner, and the Duke wasn't that loose-lipped about his castle's defences while I was in his presence. He paused. With the entire room watching him, he felt the need to seem to be useful. Again, he decided to tell them something they should already have known. I do know he sent a lot of soldiers to the nearby villages. They were under attack from slavers, and the Duke was scared that the villagers might flee south, leaving the castle without its support network. Those soldiers are probably still there, though they might have been recalled by now. My spies tell me that the soldiers are still there. The Alderman pointed to one of the numbers on the representation of the village nearest to him. The number indicated told of the strength of the garrison in the village. As for the defence of the castle itself, the garrison was greatly weakened, but ever since the king tried to attack our beloved city of Goldspawn, the Duke has been expecting some sort of retaliation from the Elven lands. When I left, I would say he only had about 1,000 men. That number could be a lot higher now, as the Duke started both recruiting heavily and expanding the barracks section of the castle before I escaped. There could well be as many as 5,000 defenders by now. Reyes felt that 5,000 defenders should be enough to give any attacking army pause for thought, especially when taking into account just how much better in combat the average human tended to be over the average elf. 5,000, the Elderman said doubtfully. Reyes began to wonder if he had claimed too much, but it was too late to backtrack now. It's only a rough estimate. Reyes felt his throat clogging a little with the worry. The number could still be as low as 1,000. The Elderman hesitated for a moment, deep in thought. I doubt the Duke has anything like 5,000. Not just in the castle, anyway. Whatever motive the Duke may have for raising such an army, the king would be worried about such power gathering by one of his own dukes. He might even think the Duke in question was thinking about wresting the crown. What if the king knew the threat? Reyes suggested. That might work, the Alderman agreed. However, I happen to know from our spies in the human capital that the king has absolutely no idea that his land is in danger. I understand that he has been lulled into a false sense of security by one of his advisers into believing that we were adequately cowed when he laid siege to the city. Word is, the king even believes that he won that battle, despite the fact that he fled with his tail between his legs. Reyes couldn't help but smile at the thought. While he might consider himself on good terms with Prince Goti, the king's son, he didn't like the king. After all, it was the king who had sentenced him to death. We'll assume that there will be between 1,000 and 2,000 defenders, the Alderman commented. What else can you tell us? What about the makeup of the defenders? How many knights? How many trained soldiers? How many untrained peasants? I really don't know, sir, Reyes said. Again he tried to stick to things the elves should already have known. I know there are at least 100 knights at the castle, but I don't know if that's all, or what sort of training they have. Nor do I know how many of the others are career soldiers, how many are levies, or what. Actually, Reyes knew these numbers fairly well, but he wasn't about to admit to anything he felt he could gloss over. The alderman didn't look all that happy. I suppose I can't expect a prisoner to be able to go into great detail about the castle defences, any more than I would explain the distribution of the troops of my own army to a human I had just sentenced to death. Nevertheless, I was hoping you would be able to tell us more. Think carefully, Chargeman. Is there anything at all that you can tell us that you think might be of use? Well, Reyes hesitated. He tried to think of something else that the elves should already know all about. Something that might help dissuade the elves from attacking. Most of the servants that work in the castle come from this small village here. He pointed at the representation of the village of Damothe. However, there are a number of small buildings located on the inside of the castle's wall where servants of relatively high rank live. One of these is a powerful mage by the name of Mangloss. Okay, Reyes thought to himself. So Mangloss no longer lived at the castle. He hoped the elves weren't to know that. Yes, the alderman commented. I'd heard of this Mangloss. There are rumours that he is one of the most powerful wizards in the human kingdom. However, he will not be our problem. On the day of the invasion, he, the entire noble family of Damothe, and a sizable bodyguard numbering at least 1,000 troops, will all be in First Town to celebrate the wedding of their sister. Really? Reyes said, feigning astonishment as best he could. 1,000? That is a sizable number. It will greatly weaken the defences of the castle. The alderman smiled. It's unlikely that they'll take soldiers from the castle. The word is that the current duke lives in Lamington, and is far more likely to take men from his personal garrison. It will leave the city of Lamington woefully underdefended, but then, that isn't our current remit. Not right now, anyway. Reyes couldn't help but feel a little bit of pleasure at the thought that the elves laying siege to Lamington were going to find an extra 1,000 or more soldiers in defence than they expected, because no one had left for the wedding in First Town after all. Reyes looked up at the elder man, and then lowered his eyes just a little out of respect. Sir, I can't help but think that I am not being as helpful as I would like to be. It seems as if everything I know is already known. Not at all, the alderman said. It is good to bounce these thoughts off someone who was actually there. Besides, you might still know something that will be of use to us, something that seems obvious and mundane, something that we may have overlooked. Yes, sir, Reyes declared. He hoped not. Take a back seat for now, the alderman commented. Our next order of business is to plan the assault itself. I want everyone who has any idea as to how we may tackle this target to put their thoughts on the table. Let's not stand on ceremony here. There are no ranks, and we are all equal. I will come to each of you in turn. The alderman turned his attention to one of the inquisitors. Dragonman Guildenstern, tell us about the idea you had concerning the dead.